There are a lot of headlines right now about the Innocence Project supporting Scott Peterson, which isn't entirely truthful. The LA Innocence Project has taken on his case, but that's not the actual innocenceproject.org main institution. And I feel like this is potentially very bad for their name. There are definitely a couple ways to look at this. One is that Scott Peterson is an inappropriate use of their resources. A nonprofit organization isn't going to be able to accomplish anything that his family and supporters can't accomplish with their own lawyers and investigators, and most importantly, money. I assume that, like every nonprofit I've ever encountered, resources are limited, and it can make sense to take on a big name case that's going to bring a lot of publicity and attention to your group, that might bring in donations, let people know you exist, have people checking you out. That can be a very good strategy. However, if people think that you are mismanaging their donations and you're spending resources on things they don't want to support, then you'll lose what you have. People will start pulling their donations. I don't want that to happen. LA doesn't have the best reputation as far as policing goes. There are a lot of people in the LA area who have had unfair trials, who don't have access to the resources and lawyers to go through appeal after appeal, which Scott Peterson has already done. He's already made it to the Supreme Court, and his family is still fighting, which is fine. I personally do have questions about his trial. There are things that I don't know went the way they should have. There are some things that I think probably should have been done differently. Odds are, you know the case. You know the story of Laci Peterson and that glowing, beautiful smile. I really have a problem with people getting attention based on what they look like. But she was so beautiful. She really just glowed and looked so warm and kind and friendly and just everything you could want in a sister, in a friend, in a daughter. She seemed like an amazing, loving person, and I haven't heard anything to dispute that. Scott, however, came off as very smug and arrogant. I think everybody who was over 10 years old in 2002, and pretty much anyone into true crime, is familiar. But Laci Rocha Peterson was 27 years old and 8 months pregnant when she disappeared on Christmas Eve in 2002. There was massive publicity. She was just a very compelling victim, and Nancy Grace dug in, and it just became the case for months. 4 months later, her body was found in the San Francisco Bay, near the spot where her husband had claimed to have been fishing. Scott Peterson was convicted and sentenced to death. It's been a long time, and I think there's a good chance that if he got another trial, he could get off, in part because if he has learned anything in this time, it will be that his cockiness was a part of his downfall. People can accept that you can be a sleazebag and a bad husband and not be a murderer. But when you add on this sense of smugness and superiority, narcissism, people are less likely to see the good in you. People are less likely to look for the good in you. I think in death penalty cases, the jurors are looking for the best in the person. You don't want to take a life or be responsible for a life being taken unless you're absolutely sure. I think that, like most sociopaths, Scott Peterson can be superficially charming. I think he has some charisma. Even with aging in prison, he's still a decent looking man. And if he came in for a new trial with nothing but circumstantial evidence against him, and these lawyers pointing out every possible technicality, and then behaved himself as humble and grief-stricken, I think he could get away with it. So I just want to clarify that this is not the Innocence Project itself. This is the LA Innocence Project. I don't know their motives. I hope they know what they're doing. You know, the concept is supposed to be looking at whether someone got a fair trial. Prosecutorial misconduct, police suppression of evidence, a number of things that unfortunately happen all the time that ensure someone does not get a fair trial. And unfortunately, in our justice system, the majority of people arrested don't have the resources to fight. The Innocence Project was a beautiful idea born of the pursuit of true justice. And I don't necessarily love that they've expanded away from factual innocence. I mean, if you didn't get a fair trial, guilty or innocent, ideally our already set appeals process would be there to help. But our justice system is broken. People can't get the assistance they need. So it's great that there is someone looking out for people who were not given a fair chance. I just don't know if it should be the Innocence Project. You know, that word, every time you see someone associated with the Innocence Project released, you see them coming out and joining their families and this happy reunion, and they've been released with the assistance of the Innocence Project, and it sends this message that they're innocent. And that's just not necessarily true. But we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, right? So if you didn't get a fair trial, you didn't get a fair trial. I just hate seeing guilty people get away with things. And I hate even more the idea of innocent people locked away. I do agree that there's reason to believe Scott Peterson did not receive a fair trial. But he's not arguing that he didn't receive a fair trial. He is arguing factual innocence. So, is Scott Peterson innocent? Probably not. I really, really doubt it. The LA Innocence Project is looking at 4 things. Witnesses who claim to have seen Laci walking Mackenzie after Scott is believed to have killed her. The break-in at the Medina house across the street within 24 hours of Laci's disappearance. A watch that was pawned that Laci is believed to have worn frequently enough that they think she may have been wearing it that day. And the orange van found burnt out with a mattress containing bloodstains inside. Now there's this van that I've never even heard of. If what I'm hearing about this van is true, that it was found burnt out, containing a bloodstained mattress in Modesto around the time of Laci's disappearance, it's definitely worth looking into. I don't know about the watch. The watch seems less significant. He could have pawned it. He could have had somebody pawn it. There's no specific evidence that she was wearing it that day, even though supposedly she wore it all the time. It's just not that. It's not a game changer for me. But I have always had questions about the robbery. That has kind of buzzed around in my mind since the beginning. And to add, this van really does make me question some things. The LA Innocence Project is asking for, quote, a complete copy of the MPD and Stanislaus County District Attorney Office's investigation into the Croton watch that was pawned on December 31st, 2002 by Deanna R., and a watch that was pawned on February 14th, 2003 by Anthony S. LAIP Director Paula Mitchell filed for old case evidence from the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office to be turned over for new DNA testing, with documents that claim factual innocence. Innocence does not necessarily mean innocent. There is a difference. We are innocent until proven guilty, but if the system cannot prove us guilty, that does not mean that we are factually innocent. The Innocence Project is really good at proving when something went wrong. They were on the forefront of using DNA to exonerate people. The Innocence Project, the wider organization, was founded in 1992 by Barry Scheck and Peter Newfield. They met as public defenders at Bronx Legal Aid Society and realized the significance that DNA, which was just becoming publicly understood, could have for criminal cases. Pretty soon, they had a group of lawyers, volunteers, and students looking into potentially wrongful convictions. The Innocence Project was founded as a law clinic at the Benjamin N. Cardoza School of Law. They've since become a very important, prominent nonprofit, a vanguard of criminal legal system reform, quote, restoring freedom for the wrongfully convicted, transforming the systems that unfairly incarcerated them, and advancing the innocence movement, end quote. The first Innocence Project client exonerated was Glenn Woodall, who was convicted of multiple sexual assaults based on eyewitness misidentification, government misconduct, and flawed serology and hair analysis. As for the LA Innocence Project, their mission statement is longer. LAIP's mission is to exonerate the wrongfully convicted, free the wrongfully incarcerated, uncover and remedy past misuse of forensic and other scientific evidence in the courtroom, improve standards for the use of forensic and other scientific evidence in the courtroom, and reform the criminal legal system to prevent future injustice. They work towards correcting injustice, restoring dignity, and, quote, improve the dialogue between scientists and stakeholders in the criminal legal system. Quote, through its work, LAIP educates the public, scientists, and stakeholders in the criminal legal system about the contributing causes of wrongful convictions and incarceration. LAIP is committed to identifying and eradicating racial injustice in the criminal legal system and to supporting all victims of wrongful convictions, their families, and their communities. LAIP believes in a criminal legal system that recognizes the inherent dignity of all people. We believe in the possibility of a criminal legal system that is not infected by racial bias and does not criminalize poverty, mental illness, or drug addiction, and that seeks to reduce harm, reconcile individuals, address trauma, and rebuild those individuals, communities, and institutions that have been damaged by crime and our society's response to it. We believe that science can help us accomplish this vision. And I couldn't agree more, but if you're ever starting a nonprofit, it is a really good idea to keep your mission statement very short and concise. The official innocenceproject.org has issued the statement that any and all inquiries about Mr. Peterson's case should be directed to the Los Angeles Innocence Project, a nonprofit organization wholly independent of the Innocence Project. I find it a little confusing still. I tried to find out if it is branches, if there are regional offices, and I couldn't find anything that confirms that. It looks like it's a completely independent organization. According to the Innocence Project Network Directory, the LAIP is a member. It is a subdivision of the Innocence Project. Scott Peterson recently sought a new trial based on some questionable juror misconduct. Strawberry Shortcake was a juror who kind of garnered a lot of attention because she had red dyed hair. Her name was Rochelle Nice, juror number 7, and the media dubbed her Strawberry Shortcake. During jury selection, she failed to disclose her own history with domestic violence. She had sought a restraining order 2 years earlier while pregnant, saying she, quote, really fears for her unborn child, end quote, due to a domestic violence situation with her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. She also failed to disclose an incident where her boyfriend beat her in 2001 while she was pregnant with another child. I think it's fair to say that she had a bias, whether she was aware of that bias or not. She claims that it didn't occur to her because she didn't consider herself a victim. But being faced with violence during 2 pregnancies, I don't see how you can't connect that to sitting on the jury in a trial of a man who may have killed his unborn child. In the end, he didn't get his retrial, but his death penalty was reduced to life imprisonment. Rochelle Nice wrote to Scott Peterson 17 times after the trial. Apparently, the tone is accusing him of having killed them, and one of the letters was written from a psychiatric institution, and she tells him the effect that the trial had on her. His responses, he wrote back 8 times, and he's very polite and friendly and detached. He seems to try to convince her of his innocence, but he also shows a lot of concern for her and her well-being and interest in her and her opinions. One article about the letters describes Scott's responses as, quote, unfailingly polite. He showers flattery on Nice at every opportunity. At one point, he compliments her on her choice of breast cancer awareness stamp. He voices concern about her losing her health insurance and inquires how her classes in cosmetology are going. He mentions that other inmates take up hobbies, but so far he hasn't figured out one that appeals to him. He still insists that he did not kill Conner and Laci, but, quote, voices no bitterness, either towards Nice or any of the other jurors. I am just not an angry person, he writes on November 3rd. I am empathetic to what you went through. More than once he talks about how hard the trial must have been for Nice. He talked a lot about those autopsy photos and how hard that must have been for the jurors to see those. Eventually, Nice sold the letters to People. She claims that she's writing somewhat for healing and somewhat in hope that he will eventually confess, which I don't think that's going to happen. There's a lot of speculation online that she's in love with him or obsessed with him. I have no idea. I do think that it is juror misconduct. I think that it's even enough to warrant a new trial. To have someone asked, have you experienced XYZ? And they absolutely have, say no and get onto the jury. To me, that's misconduct. LA Innocence Project attorneys filed over 1,000 pages in motions asking for evidence to be turned over for re-examination. So for the new evidence, I'm very curious about this orange van. And that's about it. That's really it. I think he's guilty. I think he killed Laci. I think there must have been some kind of argument or fight. Divorce was possible. He wasn't from a super religious kind of family where that would have been worse than murder. I mean, Scott had what, 6 half siblings? I don't think his parents would have condemned him for leaving his wife. As wonderful as Laci was, I'm sure they would have found a way to justify it and talk about how she wasn't good enough for Scott in some way and moved on. I feel like divorce was an option. Something happened that day, and I don't know what it is. I don't know that we'll ever know what exactly happened between them. But I believe he took her life, and I believe he belongs in prison. But I do have enough. It's not a degree of doubt that I wouldn't convict if I were in a jury, but it's pretty close. That there is enough that I'm glad that his death penalty was reversed. I think life in prison is an appropriate sentence. For some reason, I just don't think it was all about Amber Frey. I think he could have left Laci. I think, he would have looked like a cat. He would have been an asshole. And dumping your pregnant wife to go off with some blonde masseuse, that's a bad look, especially for somebody who had been the golden boy and Mr. Perfect. And it would have been hard, but not as hard as this. It's really strange how perfect they seemed from the outside. I think that they are a good example for people to look at and remind themselves that we don't know what's happening inside a marriage. But in this case, I actually wonder if things were okay. Laci had talked about some issues, but it didn't seem anything worth divorcing over up until he met another woman. And I don't know how you jump from nothing, no criminal activity, to a murder of someone you've committed your life to, who you love, who is your family, who is part of you, and then the literal part of you that is your unborn child. I don't know how you go from no violence to this ultimate act of horrific homicide. I don't understand it. And I do think he's guilty. And if he does get a new trial, now at 51, I am scared that he has matured and is going to be better able to work a jury. So I don't know. I want him to get a fair trial, and I don't think he got one. So I'm okay with the idea that he gets a new trial. I'm just really afraid of the outcome of it. I don't know. Why can't he be like Chris Watts and claim to be haunted or something? That would be nice. Haunted. I want Laci with that beautiful smile, holding Connor, an image of that in the corner of his cell every night when he's trying to close his eyes to sleep. And every morning when he opens his eyes, I want her to still be there until the day he confesses, until he tells the truth and he gives some peace to all of her friends and family and the multitude of people who really loved Laci. Laci and Conner Rocha did not deserve this. And if by some chance he was found guilty in part because of a contaminated jury and he's actually innocent, I want to know. I want to know about the van. I want to know how much the police investigated the two guys that committed the robbery across the street. I have always been hung up on that, and I would love to see what the Innocence Project, the Los Angeles Innocence Project, gains from their motions. Still think it's a bit of a waste of resources, but that's my opinion, and I can also understand why they would take on his name to get some promotion and publicity for themselves. So what are your thoughts on Scott Peterson? Do you think he deserves another trial? Do you think he warrants the resources of the Los Angeles Innocence Project being spent on him? Do you think that he deserved a new trial over the strawberry shortcake, Juror 7, Rochelle Nice thing? I kind of do. I kind of think he should have gotten a new trial. Do you think that this van is anything important that could affect the case? I mean, if her blood were to be found on that mattress, that could change everything. But then again, you know, the lack of cadaver dogs hitting on any of the locations that Scott was known to be suggests he transported her and killed her somewhere else. And a van would be a convenient place to do that. So the question is, could he have had access to a van that no one knew about? I don't know. And I don't know how that would fit into the timeline. But it would explain a few things. I think he's guilty, and I hope he stays in prison. There's so much circumstantial evidence against him, and I think for me, the number one circumstantial piece is his having told Amber that she was dead, that he had lost his wife, that this would be his first holiday season without her. I just don't see any way to get around that. It does seem that he was looking towards a future with Amber, that he wanted to be with Amber long term, and that would mean eventually introducing her to his family and friends. He might have assumed he could manipulate things so that she didn't ask too many questions when his dead wife comes up. If they mention Laci or Conner, just don't let anybody talk about the dates. Don't let her know that he lied to her by a year, and that Laci was still alive when they met, and when he was, traveling to Europe and sweeping her off her feet and being such a wonderful potential stepdad to her child. I mean, I'm glad most people recognized Amber as a hero in this story when, she could have been attacked more than she was. And I know there was a segment of people who really had it out for her, but she was a strong, smart woman who put integrity first and protecting her daughter above all else. So all my respect to her, but I wonder how her daughter handled this. By all accounts, he was seducing them both. He was stepping into this married man with a kid role, but first he had to end his wife and child. And there's no way he could have been long-term with Amber without the name Laci coming up at some point in the future. He would just have to hope she never put the timing together. Or maybe he planned to tell the truth eventually. He's a very strange man. You know, the being proud of her for coming forward. And also, you know, the concern for the impact the trial had on Rochelle Nice. I wonder if that is pure manipulation or if he does think about other people and the impact, and maybe he was able to detach himself from, you know, you turned on me and you convicted me. Not having an emotional connection to those aspects might allow him to actually give a damn what they felt and what they went through. I have no idea. I would not turn down a chance to sit down and talk to Scott Peterson, but I'd rather be sharing drinks with Laci. All right. Stay safe, listen to your instincts, and I will be back soon. Bye. Geese. Geese are evil.